a slightly different style of video than I normally do. It's gonna be a read along for Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. The third book in this series, Onyx Storm, is coming out soon, and I realized I don't remember a lot of like the details and things like that of Fourth Wing and also Iron Flame. I want to like know just going into Onyx Storm. I decided to reread Fourth Wing, and I thought I would bring you guys along for that. So how this is gonna work is I'm going to put timestamps in the description for like the chapter segments, and as I finish like a certain amount of chapters, I will talk about them like in individual sections. So I already tabbed out like what those sections are gonna be. So in general, this is the type of video where you can kind of read each section at a time and then go back, watch the video, and see my reaction to each section in real time of me reacting, because it has been quite a while since I've read this book. So I don't remember a lot that happened. I know the general idea, especially like the ending and things like that, but there is still a lot of detail in here I don't have a good memory of. Also, if you just don't want to reread the book and you want more of those details, this could be a good like spoiler-filled review that you can watch before you read Onyx Storm. So that is my intent with this video. We'll see how it goes though. So far, I have not gotten super far into it. I am right here, so about one chapter in so far. So I do have quite a bit of notes. I will start with the good, because there are a few things that I found interesting even just in the first chapter. I think it starts off pretty strong, like grabbing the attention. The quote that I like the most is right here on the very first page, and basically what it says is, "This is what 6 months of intense physical training has given me. The ability to climb barely 6 flights of stairs with a 30-pound pack." I feel like I like this quote a lot because one, it makes us sympathetic to the character, because like who wants to climb 6 flights of stairs? But also like it's kind of funny, like if you're in like super intense physical training and then it's just juxtaposed with like, I cannot do this thing. I thought it was just funny, and I feel like it was a good opener too, because we know like we're going into an intense situation and the main character feels like they're an underdog. So I liked that. I do feel like there were moments where I was just kind of like, I don't really understand like her abilities, because her sister's calling her frail, but her mother is saying like, oh, she's super quick and she scored really high on the test for agility. There's a bit of uncertainty here on what her actual abilities are. Obviously, we know she gets into the school, so like she's obviously not super fragile. She's kind of portrayed that way because she was like sickly as a child, I guess. This is Violet, the main character we're talking about. The part that I thought was really, really well done was towards the end when we get to the actual like romantic-y side of things. It's like the actual like meet cute, because we just had her sister Mira basically telling her, oh, don't let Xaden know who you are, because Xaden was like the son of like the leader of the rebellion. So it's like, don't let him know who you are because he is going to kill you. And then of course the very first person she meets who is like actually part of the school is Xaden. It's right before she has to go on like the parapet and is like potentially going to die on this parapet. She's just made friends with these two people, Dylan and Rhiannon. So they meet. There's this long paragraph of just like the description of him, which I find hilarious, but at the same time, like it's a good like romantic moment. And then it's like punctuated with Dylan dying on the parapet. I don't care for Dylan at all, but it's just like, it's a good ending to the chapter. So like, it just makes me want to continue reading on. So like, I feel like the way the plot is written just makes it super readable and just like continues to fill the tension, because even though we kind of know Xaden is like the love interest here, it is almost kind of like a love-hate start to the relationship, if anything. So like, I like that tension. It starts off really quickly and really strong in the very first chapter, and it definitely works. Now for a couple of things that annoy me. It's mostly the world building, some of the character relationships, relationship between her and her mom. I just don't get whatsoever. Her mom is like completely cold to her, like, and I understand like they're in the military, she's gonna have to be cold to her while she's in the academy, while they're at work, so on and so forth. But like, they should have a home life, right? Everyone has a home life. So I don't know, maybe not. So there's also this thing about like death and how like her sister tells her like other riders can kill you at any time. And then there was also a quote, I think, where like the parapet, which is how you get into like the Rider Academy, kills like about 15% of the people that are going in. And it's just like, this is just so unrealistic to me, because like, why would you kill 15% of your best candidates? Like, why would you do that? This is a war college, which why it's not called a military academy, I don't know. That just seems seems like too easy that it has to be war college, which just, anyway, it's fine. But like a society that is at war would not kill 15% of their best candidates just to get like the cream of the crop. Like, I'm sorry, they just wouldn't. There would be like, maybe they think these people are gonna die, but then they just end up going to another place or something like that. I don't believe that level of death in this book. And I think because the author went over the top of the death, it becomes unbelievable. And that's why I think the world building gets very weak in that aspect of it. Also, war college. Why is it called war college? And then the other side of that is like, it's kind of wishy-washy on what it thinks cruelty is too. Because like killing 15% of your best candidates is not cruelty. And yet it says it's cruel because they had a rebellion and the children of the people that rebelled were like marked, I guess like as traitors or whatever by a dragon. And she's like, oh, it seems cruel. Yeah, it seems cruel, but like historically, like children of traitors have gotten much more than just a mark on themselves. A lot of them have been killed or imprisoned themselves or exiled or whatever, if you know what I mean. So like a slight mark seems cruel, but like 15% of your best candidates dropping to their death is not cruel. Like, I don't know, it seems like there's just more sympathy towards the children of these betrayers than there are towards actually the people of this country. And then, of course, the children of the betrayers are also dragon riders, because that makes sense. Let's give the people who hate us all of this power that we have. That makes perfect sense. It's a romantasy book. It's not meant to make sense. There's just so much about this that makes it super readable and fun that I feel like I have to overlook like the glaring world building things in order to enjoy this book. So I just finished the first chunk of chapters 2 through 7, which includes the parapet and her getting across the parapet, the introduction to the wings and their stations, where like there's just this weird like setup going where Violet gets assigned to Dane's squad, but then Dane's squad gets reassigned to Xaden's wing, which why? I don't know, but it happened. And then we also have Battle Brief, which of course Violet knows exactly which questions to ask in order to look smart. And lastly, we have the first like hand-to-hand combat where they're trying to figure out like their skill levels, which doesn't turn out well for Violet and she has to be healed. But at the very end, she gets Brennan's journal, which is her brother's journal. So in this brief section, I think I've realized a few things that the author does really well. First of all, she stacks conflicts in a very interesting way that I'm really enjoying, specifically looking at like the more action-oriented scenes. So like the parapet, for example, is one of those more action-oriented scenes, but she stacks conflict in an interesting way because first of all, you have the parapet, which is one of like the main conflicts because it's like this really thin like piece of walkway, I guess, basically like a balance beam, and it's hundreds of feet up in the air, so you don't want to fall off. We also have Violet's internal motivation, which we just got from the previous like scene with her mother where she wants to like prove herself. And then we also have the rain. It starts raining. Not only that, when she's on the parapet, also has to worry about Jack, who is behind her, Jack Barlow, who for some reason just seems to hate her because she's small and looks weak, I guess. Toxic masculinity, maybe. Not only do we know that he hates her, but then we also see him push another character off of the parapet. So like, we also know he's a killer, and then he starts running after her. So not only is it raining and it's super like small ledge, she's gonna potentially fall. Now she has to run on it, and then she slips and hurts her knee. So she's also injured. So it just stacks different conflicts, and yet by the end, she still somehow gets out of it and also gets the upper hand on Jack, which I don't know if I find believable, but the scene was quite interesting to read. So readability and enjoyment was great in that scene. The other thing I think she's doing well is getting me on Violet's side. There is like this part when she's injured, Dane like tells him not to get the mender because the mender is like basically a person who would be able to magically fix her, I think it's her shoulder that has the issue this time. The parapet was the knee, the hand-to-hand combat was her shoulder injury. He tells them not to get the mender so that she can keep the injury and like try and transfer to the scribe's quadrant. And I'm just like, no, Dane, no, what are you doing right now? And I immediately was on Violet's side even before she was angry about it. I think I wrote it right there in the book. But like basically it's so annoying when everyone keeps like saying you can't do something. So of course you're gonna want to prove them wrong. I feel like in that aspect of it, I'm very much on Violet's side. And while I can overlook the world building to an extent, there is one thing that has been annoying me, and it's the death. There's just so much death, like for no reason. Like I think it's meant to raise the stakes. The more death there is, the less the death affects me, if that makes sense. I'm pretty sure there hasn't been a single chapter yet in which someone hasn't died, except for maybe the very first chapter. It's getting annoying. Killing off a bunch of red shirts is not gonna make me care about those stakes anymore. Again, I just don't find that level of death for students, like going into basic training. They're not even at war. They haven't even gotten to that part of the book yet. And yet a bunch of students are being killed and no one cares. Like just no one cares. I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. I do not think I'm going to analyze it as much in the later chapters because I am reading this a bit slower than I expected to because I'm analyzing it so much. Further I read into it, the less I'm finding to analyze anyway. And I also forgot to mention, why do they keep saying Dane Atos his last name? Like, do we need to know his last name all of the time? It'd be one thing if it was just in Violet's head, so I could be like, oh, she's saying that because he's like a love interest. But it's not just her, like it's other people as well. Like the healer, I think, that they go and see also says his last name, and the same thing's happening for Xaden too. Like I don't need to know their last name every single time. Like I get it, but I don't need to know it. Unbelievable dialogue in my opinion. In chapter 7 through 12, I'm starting to get like Hunger Games vibes from this because chapter 7 starts out with Violet in a tree hunting poison berries, and underneath her in the gathering at the tree is like a group of like the children of the rebels. So gives me flashbacks to Katniss in the tree with like the careers on the ground below her kind of hunting her. And of course, hunting and poison berries are also things I associate with Katniss. I find that connection kind of interesting. I mean, they're not really doing the same things. It just gives me the same feeling as like another character, which I think is kind of like a weird thing to include. It's a weird connection. But in this section, we do have Violet like learning to work outside of the rules, which I find incredibly interesting. I like how she learns to work smart instead of hard by figuring out like which people she's going to be going up against in the hand-to-hand combat and then poisoning them ahead of time so that they have like stomach problems and stuff and they can't perform as well against her as they probably normally will. I really like that aspect of it. But of course, Xaden catches on to this, and in the next chapter, when one of her opponents is unable to come to the fight at all, he decides to fight with her. And I find this particular scene quite interesting because I think this is like the first time we kind of realize that Xaden is kind of on her side. Like he's actively helping her here. Like for example, he says, the problem is if you aren't testing yourself here, then you're not going to get any better. So it kind of shows where he's actually like trying to help her, which also I think it's a good like juxtaposition of how Xaden treats her versus how Dane treats her. There's also the whole dagger incident where Xaden basically tells her to, you know, throw daggers at Jack's head, and Dane gives her the exact opposite advice, but then she chooses to throw daggers at Jack's head. So it's like the first instance of her choosing Xaden over Dane too. I think one thing that's done really well in this book is the love triangle, because there is that initial attraction with her between both of them, but then it also gives us good reasons as to why she would choose one versus the other, which I actually like how well it's done here. Then we have the gauntlet, which is introduced in one chapter, and this is another section where I feel like the author is trying to make us like really like care about this one, but unlike the parapet, I didn't find the gauntlet quite as interesting, partially because she uses the same, I guess, trick as she did on the parapet. She gave us something to like about Dylan and then had him go across and die, which is exactly what happens here again. She gives us Ara Lee, another character, and she makes us like her because Ara Lee is like rooting for Violet, even though Violet's very small and like can't scale some of the obstacles on the parapet, on the gauntlet. And then immediately in the first like introduction of this obstacle, Ara Lee dies, and I still don't find these deaths believable. I'm sorry, I just don't. Then like a chapter later, Xaden gives her like one word of of advice, and suddenly she's able to do the entire course with no issues. So it just feels a little cheap in my opinion. And also the advice Zayden gives her is like to not follow the rules, but like she already wasn't doing that. So like we already know she thinks outside of the box. So telling her to not follow the rules in this case, or like the rules aren't everything, I guess, in this case kind of feels a little cheap also. But I'm enjoying it and I'm excited to see what happens next because we should be getting towards the presentation, which is the first time that they're really like in front of dragons. And then of course the threshing is coming up soon. So in chapters 12 through 17, we have the presentation to the dragons and then the threshing itself. Personally, the presentation to the dragons, I didn't find that interesting. It's actually the scene I remember the most from the first time I read the book, but this time around I was just kind of like, this is kind of a useless scene, which is interesting. But I think what made me remember this scene is it's the first time we really get interactions between the different squad mates. Like it's the first time I feel like I actually start liking Rhiannon, even though like in previous scenes we've seen fairly decent interactions between her and Violet. I feel like this is like where we like finally get to see their friendship starting to blossom, which I really liked. And of course 2 of the squad mates dies because why not? I will say this is the first time we actually like get like a death that feels like what we've been saying the whole time about dragons not liking weak people. This is the first time we see the death where we actually see dragons killing someone who is weaker, I guess, than his other squad mates because he like literally cannot make a decision. So I liked that we finally got something that showed that what they're saying about dragons is true, because I feel like there's a lot of telling us about what the dragons want and not enough of us actually seeing it. So I did like that. And I think later on in this section too, Taryn actually points that out, that they're making like assumptions about what dragons want, which I found fun. I think the rest of this section is what makes me really like Violet as a character, because the threshing itself, when we have Jack Barlow and like his little gang go after Adarna because she's like weak or whatever, it just, the fact that Violet sees that happening and then goes and protects Adarna is just fantastic. Like I love that about her, and like because she does that, I can't not like her, you know what I mean? That really worked for me, and I think it worked out really well how Zayden and Sigale couldn't do anything, so Taryn steps in, and like how that plays out with Taryn being Sigale's mate and all of that. I think that section worked really well. Like it was just really well developed and thought through. And then of course we get to the part where they find out that she has bonded 2 dragons, because of course she has to be special. It wouldn't be a romantasy book if our main character wasn't special in some way, but you know what? It's okay. I'm forgiving it because I enjoyed this section a lot. Except the very, very last part, the very end, Dane comes up and kisses her. And this is right after she realizes that he cares more about rules than he does about her, because Zayden was gonna step in, even though it was against the rules when those other 3 boys were attacking her. But Dane specifically says that he wouldn't have, because it would have been against the rules, which is what it is if that's his character. But one, it puts us on Zayden's side, but it actually finally puts Violet on Zayden's side also, which is of course exactly when Dane decides to kiss her. And it was the most awkward part of this whole story so far, but I kind of like it because I like Dane not getting what he wants. At this point, Dane is not my favorite character. Like he's probably one of my least favorite characters. Like I don't even understand why Violet likes him in the first place, because he's constantly putting her down and basically calling her weak and she needs to go back to the scribes. And I kind of like that she's over him now. Chapters 18 through 21 is like the immediate aftermath of like the threshing. There's a hierarchy shift where like Violet, who bonded the most powerful dragon, is now like at the top of the hierarchy, and the unbonded are at the bottom of the hierarchy. But suddenly she's also a target again because the unbonded want to bond her dragon, so if they kill her, somehow that'll convince her dragon to bond with them, even though he wasn't convinced to bond with them before. But there is precedence for this because someone falls off their dragon and the dragon does rebond with one of the unbonded. But I feel like it's kind of obvious that Taryn's not gonna do that, but everyone wants to kill Violet now because of that. Whatever, it's fine. And she keeps falling off her dragon. That's a thing that's happening also. It's okay because she's different and Taryn's not gonna let her fall to her death. But then Dane starts yelling at her about it, and it turns out everyone's falling off their dragon. So the fact that she was falling off her dragon wasn't that big of a deal to begin with. I don't know. I'm just annoyed at some of the inconsistencies in this part of the story, because like the rules are inconsistent too. Not just that part of it, but like for example, the entire time we've been reading this whole book, it's been told that that like, oh, they can try and kill you at any time. So just be on your lookout just in case someone tries to kill you. But then she does get attacked in the middle of the night while she's sleeping. And suddenly, oh, there's a rule against this. So they have a trial for the person that allowed this attack to happen. Of course, first we have to execute the 6 people that were caught with no trial, because that makes a lot of sense. But then there is the actual like trial thing that happens, which was fine. I didn't find it particularly interesting. I think it annoys me because they do this thing where Violet doesn't tell us who it is, even though she knows who it is, and we are like in her head, so like because she knows who it is, we should know who it is, but they wait until the reveal is actually happening to everyone. I was just like, oh, I guess this ahead of time. It was kind of obvious, but now I actually don't trust the book that much. And I don't trust Violet that much because they didn't tell us ahead of time. They were just waiting for the reveal as if I was going to make it a better reveal, and it didn't. So yeah, I'm a little annoyed at this right now. And I also am a little annoyed that none of the rules seem to make sense unless they're serving the story. But we'll see. I'll get through it, and hopefully we'll get to better parts soon. Alrighty, for chapters 21 through 23 or so, I'm not going to go super far into it because I don't have that much to say about it. But we start learning about signets a little bit more, which I'm intrigued by, but I wish we got more about the signets. I think the most interesting part is when they have the intrinsic, who basically like can hear like other people's thoughts, and that scene was written so well, and I think it's a great introduction also to Professor Carr, who of course kills that first year because we have to get a kill in somewhere, of course. I do find that a bit annoying though, because we already know that Dane can read people's minds like when he touches them, but we also find out that because the other guy's an intrinsic, it's illegal, and that's why he was executed. So it just feels, again, the rules don't make sense, and I gotta stop trying to make sense of these rules. I did have some annoyance with the descriptions.
Every edge of Zayden's body is honed like a weapon, all sharp lines and barely unleashed
around
power.
his upper arms and stands out against the deep bronze of his skin. Every punch he throws, and his stomach.
How many muscles are there in the abdominals?
So rigidly defined that I could probably count every single one if the rest of him wasn't
And
so
his
damn
is the largest
distracting.
dragon relic I've ever seen.
To all those book talkers out there who talked about skipping large chunks of description, I get it now. Yeah, I definitely get it now. The half a page that we had in chapter 1 wasn't enough. The moment he takes his shirt off, we need more. And somehow she reels me back in with, he only tolerates my existence because our dragons are mated. And here I am salivating over his half-naked body. At least she's self-aware, I guess. So there was kind of a point to the description of his back because there's like scars on it or whatever. But still, it was a bit much.
And then there's this as well, which same girl, I can't believe it either.
But other than that, I am enjoying this, and I do think every time the author annoys me with something, she like brings it back with humor and like self-awareness. Like this book is very self-aware that it's a romantasy, and I think that's what makes it work so well too. So next is chapters 24 through 29, and I don't normally say this, but I feel like there's too much plot in this book. So in the last chapter, in chapter 23, I actually liked what was going on. I feel like there was some things that were a little contrived. So for example, there was the part where Jack finally got to spar against Violet, which we already know she figures out who she's sparring with ahead of time, and then she poisons them. So we know that's what she's going to do, but there's like this setup of him being allergic to oranges because like it's so obviously done too, because we don't know anything about Jack other than like he hates Violet for no reason whatsoever. And then just randomly, as he's confronting her, he like his friend just super randomly decides to offer him an orange, and he like bats his hand away and says like, get that away from me or whatever. So it's like obvious like this is a setup for something. And then of course she uses oranges to like poison him at the end of the match or in the match, and like it's supposed to be like this like, oh, that was so clever or whatever. She could just use her regular poisons. Like it doesn't have to be an orange. Like that was completely unnecessary for no reason. Now if it was one thing like where Xaden had caught her using the poisons before, and if he had prohibited her from using them and found a way to stop her from like gathering them or something like that, or someone else had caught her, like one of the teachers or whatever, and she couldn't use those methods anymore, and then she had to get creative and do the orange thing, I would have found that a lot more interesting, and it would have been like there would have been a reason for it. But since there wasn't a reason for it, it just kind of felt like, why? Like, I don't really care to know more about Jack and his apparent allergy to citrus, but like, just why? Why was that necessary? And then also, in the 5 chapters or so that I read, there are like 3 like main like big events that could be like the ending event for the entire book, and yet they're just like very episodic. It's almost like watching a TV show. Actually, I think they should make a TV show of this. I think it would work out well. Anyways, my point is they have the visit to the outpost, which is of course attacked, and she has to leave Mira behind. They have the team battle, which like they end up winning and getting the crystal egg and all of that, but then they also have to like steal something from somewhere in the compound. They end up stealing the map from her mother's office because that has the best intelligence. So all 3 of those could have been done more in depth, have like a bigger payoff, but I feel like they were just kind of like glossed over and just done for like the sake of having a plot, having something to do, while there are parts that I feel like I want more from the character side of it that we're just not getting. Like for example, Mira, we spend a little bit of time with her, but then Violet goes off to spend more time with her, but we don't get any of that time with Mira. Only Violet gets that time with Mira. We don't get that time with Mira, and I want that time with Mira. If this is like one of the few times that I would ever say, I think this book has a little too much plot, not enough character development, and not enough world building. Because it has so much plot, I forget a lot of it actually, because I don't know where it's going. Like I remember the very ending, like the cliffhanger, what happens at the cliffhanger, but I don't remember anything that's leading up to that. Oh, we also did get like more signet talks. I do not like how they introduced the signets, because they introduced it by all of the characters telling their own signets because they have to go do this thing, so they have to do it very quickly, where it would have been a lot more interesting just to see the characters actually develop those signets, in my opinion. Violet can manipulate thunder or whatever. Oh, and also Jack died in the team battle. He goes after her and she uses her thunder, like strikes down an entire keep. So, which is how she manifests her signet, which is cool, but also like Jack falls off the mountain or the building or whatever. In my mind, I feel like I like remember him coming back to life, but I might be wrong about that. Don't take my word for that. But onward to the next set of chapters. Alrighty, so for chapters 31 through 34, I kind of switched to the audiobook for a little bit, mostly because I wasn't like putting that many tabs anyway towards the end of the book. I do want to finish the book now. Like I'm so close. I have so much to do. So I needed to listen to the audiobook while I was doing some driving and some different things. This section has been quite interesting. So we meet King Taurus for the first time in their like graduation kind of like reception sort of banquet thing. And I feel like I didn't even realize there was a king. Like we don't know anything about their country structure of government. All we know is that it's very a highly military college that they're going to. So like General Sorengale and General Melgren are kind of like the big bads of their world. And then we realize, oh yeah, there's actually a king. So like he's actually the one telling them to do all of this. It feels a little bit more real now that we have a king involved, and he does seem kind of horrible, and that you see like her mother and General Melgren kind of like sucking up to him a little bit, which I thought was great. But I feel like that should have came a lot earlier. Like we should have, if not met the king, because I don't think you need to meet the king in chapter 1, we should at least have known his name and like his deeds and his past and things like that to get a better idea, because this is a very political, like war-driven society. So like the king and the person who controls all of that is quite important, right? And then of course we get to the point where Violet and Xaden finally get together. There's a little back and forth, and then he like gives in. It was the way they decided to do it was on the parapet, is when they finally like decided, oh yeah, we're gonna give this thing a shot or whatever. And I was just like, really? Can you be more obvious with the symbolism? Because it's like giving it a leap of faith, and the parapet is like this tall place that you can easily fall. I think at one point she even says there's no fear on the parapets because you need your courage to get across it or whatever. It felt a little on the nose to me, but it was fine. And then we have the war games that starts, and the part that I just finished is when the Griffin Riders show up, and like, you don't think he could have said something to her at some point? I feel like at least on the ride over, like it's not like they can't talk to each other in their head, but I guess he probably wanted to say it in person or whatever. So like she's completely caught off guard, and I don't know, I feel like if you're going to start a relationship with someone, then they're gonna want to know what your politics are. Let's put it that way. He did not say any of that up front. They had weeks in which they just like weren't really talking to each other. And then this is of course when it comes out. So I don't know. I feel like I'm remembering better now what happens at the end. So I think I'm just gonna read to the end of the book and we'll check in with you again afterwards.
All right, in chapter 35, he has a good point. He couldn't tell her anything because Dane would be in her head, which is a pretty good point. But I do like that the whole Venom thing is real. Otherwise, the whole war thing was not making sense. I also did like that she did a really good job of like setting up all of these like little clues ahead of time. Like they're not getting all of the information in Battle Brief, for example, and there was always like a reason why. Like, oh, it's probably just classified information or whatever. But like we're finding out like they just didn't want to tell the students about this and probably are not telling anyone outside of the overall military. A really good twist. And it's realistic in the sense that I do think it's possible like if your country is in a safe place and your leadership knows they can, protect the country, why would they enter a war that is affecting other people? I think our countries in our world do that all the time. So it feels very realistic in that sense as well. But she is kind of really annoying me with like tying it all back to the romance. I'm just like, come on. You told him you loved him like literally like a few minutes ago. Just because you find out a little bit more about somebody doesn't like change everything else you knew about them. So I'm kind of annoyed by that fact. Okay, I'm in like chapter 38 now. A lot has happened, which I will get to, but I just couldn't with the line she just said. She said, but he couldn't care for me. You don't keep secrets from people you care about. Have you ever been in a relationship? Of course you keep secrets. I'm sorry. And like, he had really good reasons for keeping these secrets. Actually, the one secret he didn't keep led all of you into this battle because you literally had someone in your head that was not him. Like someone who was against you guys in your head. I can't even with Violet right now. Like, I understand at this point in the novel, she is like literally dying, but it's just so frustrating because sometimes this book makes sense and sometimes like this time, how could you be so stupid, Violet? Like, I'm like, that's just what I'm thinking because like a second ago while we were in the middle of combat, your mind could work logically and figure out what was going on. But the moment we get out of that, suddenly your mind doesn't have any logic anymore. Alrighty, so I finished Fourth Wing. Just because it's top of mind, I'm gonna start with the last chapter. I really don't like that it's from Xaden's point of view for a couple of reasons. It's not that I don't want his point of view. I do want his point of view, and I think it would be very interesting to see his point of view in like throughout the entire novel. But the very last chapter, a lot of things happen that it is Violet's reaction that would be interesting. Like, she's waking up in Orisha, in the capital of the rebellion. That would be so interesting to see her like see this happening, right? Number two, like, we've been kind of questioning Xaden's like commitment to her, his love for her, his feelings for her, whatever, since we found out that he was lying to her. I mean, there's a reason why he was lying to her, and it makes sense to the point that personally I've already like forgiven him for that. But like, just having a little bit of that uncertainty of like whether his feelings for her are that strong or not, I think would be a lot more interesting rather than actually hearing his feelings from his own head, showing that, oh, his feelings for her are not only certain, but they started way before Violet's actual feelings for him started. So I don't know, that part annoyed me. And then last but not least, the most interesting part is Brennan shows up, of course, the very end, because they go to Orisha so that she can be mended by her brother who this entire time we thought was dead, and of course is not dead now. So her brother coming back to life, yeah, I would like to see that from her point of view. I'm sorry, but I would. And I would also like to see a little bit of the follow-up from that, like just a little bit of an interaction between the two of them in this book would be interesting, and then we can go to the next book. I really don't like that he just gets like a sentence or two at the very end, but other than that, it's okay. I still think the ending was really good, and I think it was quite satisfying before we even got to the cliffhanger. I hate cliffhanger endings, but this one works
for me to an extent because we did get all of the satisfying stuff for it, which was the battle with the Venom and the Wyvern, and it was really well done. Like, it was probably as well done as most fantasy books that I've read, and I enjoyed that part of the book very much. I also liked that she had to use her head and had to think and had to solve problems during the actual battle, and it just really worked for me. Like, this is like a pretty good dragon battle too. Like, there are a lot of things that are happening in the air, and it's well described and everything like that as well. I think I mentioned at some point that there's just so much death in this book that I don't care for any of the deaths, but I finally found a death that I did care for, which was Liam. Oh, that was so heartbreaking. And I think the way the death happened too, with the dragon dying and Liam like being perfectly fine, but because he's bonded to the dragon, he died too. That was just so heartbreaking. And I think part of it's also like he died kind of for her and for Taryn, and to an extent for Xaden as well. So like his whole storyline was heartbreaking but fantastically done. So I really enjoyed that aspect of as well. Like I almost want to give it 5 stars again, which is what I gave it the first time around. I feel like I should, because I did enjoy it almost enough to give it 5 stars. I'm gonna knock it down half a star because of my frustration that I've had throughout the entire novel. I've been frustrated so many times with this book, but like kind of in a good way. So 4.5 stars. There's not very many books that I would reread that are lower than like a 4 or 4.5 stars. And this is definitely a book that I would definitely reread in the future if I wanted to. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and it's getting 4.5 stars from me. I'm back because the Audible version of this has 2 bonus chapters, chapter 9 and 16, but told from Xaden's perspective. And as I said before, it's not that I didn't want his perspective, but just that I didn't want it in the very last chapter. But chapter 9 and 16 were quite good from his perspective. Chapter 9 is when Xaden decides to spar with Violet, and then chapter 16 is like right after the threshing, right before we find out whether Violet can bond with both Andarna and Taryn. So like it's really interesting. Chapter 16 I found incredibly interesting, particularly because we get to see like the bond between Xaden and Sigale, and I just loved that connection. Their relationship is so great. She's a little bit like a mother to him, but like also like likes to tease him and things, and I really enjoyed that. Chapter 9 I didn't like quite as much. Part of it too is he specifically mentions Brennan in chapter 9, and it annoys me because at that point we know that he knows Brennan is alive, and he knows that Violet doesn't know that Brennan is alive, and yet he's still treating her like General Sorengale's daughter. It feels kind of like an afterthought that Brennan was alive when, like, you know there is a Sorengale that is on your side, so why wouldn't you also potentially give Violet benefit of the doubt? She just hasn't been given the option to go to the other side. So that part annoyed me a little bit, but overall, I really did like the bonus chapters. I felt like we could have used that during the novel a little bit more. Alrighty, before I close this video out, I feel like I should do some key takeaways from Fourth Wing that we should be taking into the next novel. So a few things here. One, there was a love triangle between Xaden and Dane, but obviously Dane is a poo-poo head, and we do not like him because he reads people's minds for no reason. So Xaden is the one that we're rooting for, but Violet is angry at him, honestly, for no reason. He kept secrets from her. She should know that he's gonna keep secrets from her, but it's okay because it's just her feelings. She will logically come around to it eventually. Hopefully. We'll find out. Number 2, Liam's dead, and I'm really sad about that. But he asked Violet to take care of his sister, and I'm remembering a little bit about that relationship in Iron Flame, and I'm kind of excited for it, to be honest. Also, Brennan is alive because Violet's brother being alive was actually, it was foreshadowed from the very beginning. So like that's not that surprising, but it was a great ending. I loved that ending. I'm a little annoyed that Brennan being a Sorengale and being Violet's brother doesn't get her more trust with the rebellion relic people or anything like that. I feel like they should trust her more, but it is what it is. She's also kind of sad because Xaden, but not only Xaden, also Taryn and Andarna kept this secret from her. That is kind of heartbreaking, but again, Dane's a poo-poo head. Last but not least, Venom and Wyverns exist, and this I find incredibly fascinating part of the world building. It's actually one of the things about the world building that really redeemed these novels for me. I do not like how they were presented, being as they came from a novel that she read that she thought was just a fairy tale and then turned out to be real. But I feel like it actually works. So while I don't like it, it works. It's fine. I'm gonna be okay with it. And I really enjoyed this. So I hope you did too. So that is all I have for you. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up to support my channel. I post videos at least once per week, but I've been posting a lot of bonus videos lately. So please consider subscribing and let me know in the comments your thoughts on Fourth Wing because I'd love to hear from you. Thank you guys so much for watching and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.